expired. I call the Minister for Urban Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Shadow Minister began by accusing me of having chutzpah, that fine Yiddish word. That really is a remarkable example of the pot calling the kettle black, if I may say so, Mr Deputy Speaker, because he had the temerity to lecture the government about the consistency of our treatment of the WestConnex project. This is the man who in 2014 was proudly beating his chest and claiming credit for having funded WestConnex with $1.8 billion. Let's remind ourselves what he said to Ellen Fanning on the ABC. He said, quotes, "Well, that's not right, Ellen. Take WestConnex, for example. We funded the work in terms of planning. $25 million was already spent from us, and $1.8 billion was included in last year's budget for the WestConnex project." So in 2014, the Shadow Minister proudly claiming credit for WestConnex. By 2016, he couldn't run away from it fast enough, because in 2016 he told Fran Kelly, who asked him, "Did you provide that money?" That's to say, money to fund WestConnex. His answer was, "We provided $25 million for planning, Fran. That's the whole point. They say they support planning. We provided $25 million, not for construction. Not a dollar did we provide for construction." Now, if that isn't a world-class, Olympic-grade backflip, you will never see one in this House. And you do see them from time to time, and that is a remarkable backflip from the man who's just presumed to lecture the government about consistency when it comes to infrastructure. Let's look at the facts, Mr Deputy Speaker. The proposition before the House this afternoon is that the government, in the words of the Shadow Minister, has allegedly failed to plan for the future by investing in nation-building infrastructure. Investing in nation-building infrastructure. Let's just have a look at what was in the budget that's just been brought down. $8.4 billion for the Inland Rail project, a transformational freight rail project that will bring together our three eastern seaboard states, Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, will equip exporters in each of those states to better address export markets. There could be no better definition of a nation-building project, a project that by definition no one state government can ever carry forward. If there was ever a project which requires the leadership, the commitment, the direction of a national government, it is Inland Rail, an $8.4 billion commitment designed to increase markedly the share of the freight market taken by the rail mode on the north-south corridor. Mr Deputy Speaker, as you know, on the east-west corridor, Perth to Melbourne, Perth to Sydney, rail takes the lion's share of freight. And on the north-south corridor, rail has the capacity to do the same, but you need to have a reliable 24-hour end-to-end journey time. Inland Rail will deliver it and will transform the way the freight is moved up and down the eastern seaboard between those two critical markets of Brisbane and Melbourne. Nation-building infrastructure, Mr Deputy Speaker. The deeply misguided premise of the motion before the House this afternoon is that in some way there's been a failure to address nation-building infrastructure. Let me take another example. $5.3 billion in equity investment for Western Sydney Airport. Governments for 40 years, Mr Deputy Speaker, have failed to take a decision which has been crying out to be taken. It took a coalition government to make the decision to commit to proceed with a second Sydney airport at Badgerys Creek. And let's remember, Sydney is Australia's international aviation gateway. 40% of international traffic comes into Sydney. And let's also remember, Mr Deputy Speaker, let's also remember that the joint study into the aviation needs of Sydney, which reported in 2012, commissioned under the previous government, and I want to acknowledge the work of the Shadow Minister, then the Minister, in commissioning that study, found that Kingsford Smith Airport would run out of slots by 2027, and by the mid to late 2030s there would be no additional capacity, even with so-called upgauging, replacing smaller aircraft with larger aircraft in existing slots. So it is critical for the aviation capacity of Sydney and the nation that we build this piece of vital nation-building infrastructure. It will deliver better service to people in Western Sydney, some 2 million people who will be closer to Western Sydney Airport than to Kingsford Smith. It will deliver some 20,000 direct and indirect jobs by the early 2030s. You could not find an example of nation-building infrastructure more clear than the Inland Rail and Western Sydney Airport. What about the package we've committed to in Western Australia, Mr Deputy Speaker? Some $2.3 billion jointly between the Commonwealth and the McGowan government, a $792 million commitment to rail for projects, the extension of the rail to Yanchep and the Thornley to Coburn line, subject to satisfactory business cases being assessed by Infrastructure Australia, major funding for road projects. In Victoria, over $1 billion, $500 million for regional rail, $30 million for a business case for a rail link between Melbourne and Tullamarine Airport. Mr Deputy Speaker, there is rail from Sydney to Sydney Airport. There is rail from Brisbane to Brisbane Airport. There is rail being built from Perth to Perth Airport, yet Melbourne, this enormous, this critical city, does not have a rail link between the city and the airport. We want to fix that. That's why we've committed $30 million for a business case for planning on this, and we want to work to deliver, to work with all of the stakeholders here to take this critical issue forward. And around Australia, Mr Deputy Speaker, a wide range of infrastructure projects underway. A $3 billion package announced just in November last year, 50-50 funding from the Commonwealth and the Victorian government for infrastructure in Victoria, including a $1 billion package to upgrade the Monash. In South Australia, a $1.6 billion investment in the North-South corridor. The $3.6 billion Western Sydney Infrastructure Plan, the new M12 that will connect Western Sydney Airport to the M7 into the Sydney motorway network, the Northern Road being upgraded to 4 lanes all the way. So vital infrastructure to support and to leverage Western Sydney Airport. And of course, Mr Deputy Speaker, you cannot help noticing that there is a strong focus on rail in this budget. New funding for rail projects. I've talked about the $792 million for the Yanchep extension and the Thornley to Coburn line in Perth, subject to satisfactory business cases being assessed by Infrastructure Australia. I've talked about $500 million for regional rail in Victoria. And of course that builds on a track record, an impressive track record of rail projects already funded by the Turnbull government. $490 million for the Perth to Forestfield Airport rail link. The Flinders Link project in South Australia, $43 million. Sydney Metro City and South West, this transformational metro rail project, $1.7 billion. That'll be a every 5 minutes turn-up-and-go service, driverless trains, a transformational approach to rail. In Queensland, we've committed $10 million for business planning for the Cross River Rail project. And of course, in this budget, we've included the $10 billion National Rail Program, with funding to flow from 2019-20. This is designed to support the major city-shaping rail projects around the country, which are at various stages of development. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, we heard the various speaking points, the standard talking points from the Shadow Minister. He made a series of disappointingly false and inaccurate claims about infrastructure spending. The facts are very straightforward, Mr Deputy Speaker. Under the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd government, over the period of the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd government, Commonwealth spending on infrastructure averaged just over $6 billion per year. Now, between 2013-14 and 2020-21, between 2013-14 and 2020-21, the average is $8.1 billion. Compare and contrast, Mr Deputy Speaker. Compare and contrast. Rudd-Gillard-Rudd, just over $6 billion. The Coalition, $8.1 billion. And Mr Deputy Speaker, you are seeing from the Coalition, from the Turnbull government, a strong commitment to infrastructure planning, to infrastructure investment, to nation-building transformational projects like Inland Rail, like Western Sydney Airport. We are proud of these commitments. These are significant, these are major commitments about delivering infrastructure that the people of Australia need.